it's Sam, and I'm making another video about the zodiacs, and in particular that remarkable history that shows us how advanced the Indians were, the prehistoric Indians, and their understanding of the Earth going around the sun, and the seasons, and the solstices, and making a structured and accurate calendar and almanac for, mapping their position each year. And then also the zodiac, which measures these things as they were measured back in the Vedas, and then how those sun-moon cycles and seasons and equinoxes and months got all kind of conflated and mixed together with the zodiac at a time when things became unclear. And this has led, a few thousand years later, to a lot of confusion about the zodiacs. And again, you want to understand they weren't so confused back then, at least the Indians weren't, because they never used the Tropical Zodiac for erecting horoscopes, which is what a zodiac is. Once we put the term zodiac on something, it's for measuring something. It's not just an arbitrary term. And in no text, whether very ancient texts like Vedic Jyotisha or any of those kind of texts, do we see that the zodiac is pinned to equinoxes or any kind of thing like that in an astrology text. Not a single incident of that, or any time going forward, which includes times when the Indians were mixing with Persians and Arabs and others who were obviously using the Tropical Zodiac, and that the Indians were aware of, like in Tajik and Nilikanta, or even some of the texts like Kala Prakashika and Muhurta Chintamani and other texts that came much later and that were more specialized. We never see the Indians referring to Aries being pinned to the vernal equinox or anything like that. The only time we ever saw those indications were in a couple texts right after this information entered India. And then the Indians resisted using it, and they instead used the Sidereal Zodiac, which is the tradition, and obviously all of the techniques in Indian astrology come from that and are based on the Sidereal Zodiac. But it's important to go back and understand what happened and how these things worked, especially in the prehistoric times, and how even the conflation of the zodiac by the Greeks, what the implications were of that in India. So let me just go through some of these things here first so we can understand these are all different things. Solstices and equinoxes are totally their own phenomena. Okay, the solstices and equinoxes are the cardinal points of the Earth going around the Sun. The extreme north, the extreme south, and then the equal when the Sun crosses the celestial equator, moving north or south. That's what this measures. Seasons, totally different from solstices and equinoxes. They're not inherently joined. They're not the same thing. 12 months, 12 portions of the year, which is a calendar, again, has nothing to do with any of these things. These are all separate. Means we can make a calendar based on anything. We can make the seasons based on anything. We can look at the equinoxes, but they're an actual event. But they don't necessarily link up with these other things. They're totally separate. And then soli-lunar cycles, okay, which is sun-moon cycles, which is from new moon to new moon. This is the moon going around the Earth, measured in relationship to the sun. Nothing to do with these other things. There's approximately 12 of these every year. That's the reason why we have 12 months in the year. But these soli-lunar cycles have nothing to do with anything else. These are all separate measurements. The zodiac, again, totally separate from all of these other things. And I put zodiac for measuring and put 12 months for calendar just to make the distinction. So the zodiac is for measuring objects moving around the Earth, okay? Including the moon. But the soli-lunar cycles is the moon moving around the earth in relation to the sun. This is why the ancient cultures measured things like eclipses and moon cycles, full moons and new moons. So these are all separate things. And then I put down here tropical as a term can really only mean the Earth-Sun relationship. This is referred to as tropical by scientists and others. It does not necessarily mean the zodiac for measuring planets moving around the Earth. It's not necessarily a zodiac. And I say this intentionally because you'll see where even scientists who aren't astrologers and they're not talking about zodiacs will use the term tropical to refer to basically solar-based calculations. They'll just use the word tropical rather than solar often, sort of interchangeably. I have below here, or on this page somewhere, where you can download a text, a PDF by Subhash Kak, who was a Indian researcher. He's actually written some books with David Frawley and whatnot, and he has a sort of study between the Indian and the Babylonian cultures, and in particular as it relates to the seasons, solstices, and months that form the calendar in the Krishna Yajurveda. And he even refers to the 12 months of the part of the Krishna Yajurveda called the Taittiriya Samhita. He refers to that as tropical. He says that 12 months, and then he puts tropical. He's using the term tropical to mean they're solar-based. Not that it's a tropical zodiac that you use to measure bodies moving around the Earth. That's a whole different thing. So I've grouped these things into categories for a reason. Because these three things are supposed to go together. And they did go together in the Krishna Yajurveda, which is part of the same text that we get the final recension of the Vedanga Jyotisha, which the first instance of it was in the Rig Veda. Then we see it completed in the Yajurveda in the part called the Vedanga Jyotisha. I also have a link to that below. But in the same text, in the same Veda, they're both from the Krishna Yajurveda, we have the section called the Taittiriya Samhita. And it formalizes the 12 solar months. I like to use the word solar, not tropical, because it's confusing at this point with astrologers. Because then they go, oh, see, tropical zodiac. And this is one of the reasons why I think this conflation has happened, where people say things that are completely unfounded, like tropical zodiac in the Vedas. In the Vedas, they were using tropical zodiac. They were not using tropical zodiac. They knew the Earth was going around the sun. They measured the year with equinoxes and solstices. They connected them with seasons. And they broke them up into 12 solar portions. And that formed their calendar. It was a calendar. It was both a civil calendar and also, you know, a calendar that connected them with the seasons. And I intentionally said that seasons and solstices and equinoxes, they're not the same thing. Now, in the West, they are the same thing at this point. We have 4 seasons, and the 4 seasons are connected to the solstices and equinoxes. Of course, the first day of winter is the winter solstice. First day of spring is the vernal equinox. But in India, their 6 seasons are no longer connected with the solstices and equinoxes like they're supposed to be, and with the 12 solar portions like they're supposed to be. So the 12 solar portions, which were in the Krishna Yajurveda and referred to in the Vedanga Jyotisha, are no longer connected with their seasons like they're supposed to be. The Indians are supposed to have 6 seasons that intersperse between 12 solar portions, as defined in the Krishna Yajurveda. But here's the thing to understand. Even in the Krishna Yajurveda, the way they measured it and measured the position of these things was with the zodiac. They said that the equinox is happening in Shravishta and Aslesha. Not equinox, I'm sorry, solstice. It's happening in Shravishta and Aslesha. They didn't say it was happening in some solar month. The solar months revolved around these, but these were measured with this. Always measured. The zodiac for measuring where things were was always sidereal. Again, you can just look at the tradition. Okay, you can say, oh, well, he says that, he says that. It's not a matter of what I say. They never used the tropical zodiac for measuring anything. That's why when the tropical zodiac entered India around the 4th century, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, they resisted it because they never measured anything with it. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But the soli-lunar cycles, even back then, were measured, and to this day, the new moon cycles, and therefore the months now in the main Indian calendar, are based on sidereal portions that are based on the likely nakshatra of the full moon that month. This is why Indian months have names like, Ashad and, Kartika and things like that, because it's the likely nakshatra, of course, sidereal, that you'll find the full moon that month. These were always measured, the soli-lunar cycles, by a sidereal placement. And unfortunately, what has happened in India is the seasons have now been connected to these portions, mainly the sun and its ingress into a sidereal sign rather than a solar sign. And I resist saying tropical because tropical sounds like a tropical zodiac, and it's not. So this is why we still have this persistent error in India today, where we don't have the seasons connected with the solstices, equinoxes, and 12 solar portions that's supposed to make up the year. So back in the Krishna Yajurveda, it was clear. And in the Surya Siddhanta, they gave the same direction in regard to the year, to the solstices and equinoxes, to the seasons, and to the 12 portions. They said the same thing in the Surya Siddhanta. But by the time of the Surya Siddhanta, these things, the equinoxes and the seasons, which were joined by the Greeks, they joined both the equinoxes and the seasons, because the vernal equinox was the first day of spring. Those things were joined by the Greeks and pinned to the zodiac. So by the time you get to the Surya Siddhanta, the same thing that was measured in the Krishna Yajurveda, which was the calendar, joined the seasons and the solstices. Now you have the zodiac join the seasons and the solstices in the Surya Siddhanta. So instead of saying that the winter solstice happens in Shravishta and the summer solstice happens in Aslesha, which is the pure sidereal measurement, now it says the winter solstice happens in Capricorn and the summer solstice happens in Cancer. Because they've pinned the Greek seasons and the vernal equinox of Aries to the zodiac. So the problem you have now in India is these things are out of whack. So it shows a misunderstanding of the vernal equinox, of the solstice and the northern and southern course of the sun. They're no longer connected with the seasons. Instead, the seasons are connected with sidereal Sankrantis and ingresses. And then you also have the soli-lunar cycles interacting as well. So the big problem is we have this conflation of all of these ideas that got mixed up. And again, when you look back, it's very easy. For example, if you look back in the Yajurveda or the Vedanga Jyotisha and the Surya Siddhanta, and you see these things being referred to, I can see how someone could say, oh, see, they were using Tropical Zodiac the whole time, because they're talking about 12 portions, they're talking about seasons, they're talking about equinoxes, Tropical Zodiac. No, it's not Tropical Zodiac as we are now using the term. The zodiac is for measuring the placements of things. And in the Yajurveda, the Vedanga Jyotisha, everything was measured with Siderial, with nakshatras. They had 5-year yuga cycles, which were measured as 135 nakshatras. The seasons were measured, the length of the seasons were 4.5 nakshatras. Absolutely sidereal measurement. This is why the Indians never did anything with Tropical Zodiac, and when the Tropical Zodiac entered India from Greece, after this conflation, after the solstices and seasons, solstices, equinoxes, and seasons were pinned to the measuring device, the Indians never used it. And yes, it showed up in a couple texts, particularly the Surya Siddhanta. And early astrology texts like the Vedanga Jyotisha, you see reference to the equinoxes being pinned to the signs and all. But again, obviously, the Indians resisted. They did not use that calculation. And then, again, throughout history, every Vedic astrology text that was ever written and organized around all of these techniques and methods used sidereal zodiac. They knew why, and I think they knew why, and they knew the difference. They understood this. They understood that these things are different. And that, you know, as I have over here, these things are related to the Earth going around the Sun, and these things are related to the cosmos and the universe and what became the Panchanga. So again, all of these, this is all about the Earth going around the Sun. Equinoxes, we're on the Earth, so it's the extremes in our orbit around the Sun. They should be connected to the seasons. And now, in India, they're disconnected from the seasons. And the 12 months, the 12 portions. There should be 12 portions that start on the equinox or the solstice that make up our calendar that are connected to the seasons. You want to understand this about the calendar now. We have a calendar now that is 12 months, but it's not connected to the solstices or the seasons. Our calendar is not connected to solstices or seasons. But we still have a 12-month, which emulates 12 solar lunar cycles, calendar. Their ancient writings were all for civil calendars and for knowing when to perform rituals and know when the sun is moving north or south. And so, again, we can clearly see how these things could get confused. Again, even with the solar lunar cycles. The reason this doesn't fit, these lunar cycles each year, is because they do not fall in reference to any of these other cycles. So the 12 months, it's impossible to make a 12-month calendar that corresponds with the solar lunar cycles, because you never know when you're going to have the new moons and the full moons. They do not fall in any predictable cycle. All of this is predictable. We can measure this very easily because we can measure the Earth going around the Sun. The Earth going around the Sun is the only thing that's consistent. And it's very consistent. So we're supposed to have solstices, equinoxes, and calendar all lined up. And imagine if we did. The Indians did. The ancient Indians did. Their year started on an equinox. It was connected to the season, and they had the 12 portions. That's what they did. So the ancient Indians were deeply connected to these rhythms, and they got the calendar right. But they weren't doing anything related to horoscopic astrology or anything that had to do with a zodiac. The zodiacs developed probably together in Babylon and India because they occupied the same space and the same portions, and there was so much sharing of technology between these two cultures. and then developed into horoscopic astrology and things like that later, after this pinning of the equinoxes to the zodiac occurred by the Greeks. But again, as we know, the Indians did not take up that way of measuring the zodiac. When the Greeks pinned the equinox to the zodiac, this was happening at the same time that the Romans, particularly Julius Caesar, created the Julian calendar. This was at the time when we were trying to create a better calendar in the West, and we were also sliding deeper into the Dark Ages. So again, realize that the ancient Indians had the right things joined. They had the right things connected. And later on in the Surya Siddhanta, they connected these things again. But by the time of the Surya Siddhanta, they tried to connect them with the zodiac. They connected them with the zodiac. So you have to understand this. And again, I think one of the biggest problems where people get confused is, you know, those few Vedic astrologers who use Tropical Zodiac, they tend to like worship the Surya Siddhanta like it's this infallible book that could never be wrong. It's in Surya Siddhanta. Like, you know, it might be wrong. It has a calculation. If not wrong, it shows this conflation of the zodiacs. It shows these things being joined, and the Indians had never done that before. And simply because it's in the Surya Siddhanta, I'm sorry, but I question it. I don't think it's right just because it's in the Surya Siddhanta. In fact, it obviously isn't. The Indians obviously went against what's in the Surya Siddhanta. So again, it's like, and again, I'm not saying the Tropical Zodiac is a mistake, or that if people use it, it doesn't work, or whatever, but we have to be honest and clear about what we're saying. Ptolemy wasn't even an astrologer, and even the astrologers of his time didn't necessarily use the Tropical Zodiac. It took hundreds of years for that to be the convention, and it didn't happen until probably the 6th or 7th century when the Arabs started using it. So the fact that this shows up in the Surya Siddhanta, rather than making people question the veracity of that, you know, all you need to do is measure it against what was in the Vedas. You talk about what was in the Vedas, it wasn't Tropical Zodiac. It was solstices, seasons, and months joined. And measured with nakshatras. That's clear. And every researcher who's ever looked at it sees the same thing. And because you might see the term tropical once in a while, they're not talking about the tropical zodiac, they're just talking about the Earth going around the sun. I think because that term has been used as a catch-all term, tropical, that's where you see it. And so we also have to understand what the zodiac actually is. We have, this is related to the Earth, Sun. All of these things are about our life on Earth. The soli-lunar cycles and the zodiac itself are very much cosmic relationships. And again, that's why I wrote here the Panchanga. It's also, you know, related to the Panchanga. Soli-lunar cycles and the Panchanga has to do with the phase angle between the Sun and the Moon. Of course, it's measured sidereally with, you know, nakshatras and also tithis, which you could calculate them tropically. I mean, you could calculate these things tropically, which honestly doesn't make much sense because nakshatras are the foundation, really, of the Panchanga. I guess there are people, I don't know, who would bring tropical into that. Again, at some point it just doesn't make any sense. We have to understand that the zodiac is, look up in the sky, you see the stellar portions, the universal portions of things that are not just of this earth. These are the things that measure our life on earth. And they do it beautifully. And our life on earth needs to be measured in relation to these things. But then our mind and our cosmic mind and our karma and things that are beyond just this earth, because guess what? We're not of this earth. We come to this earth with karma. But all of these things like nakshatra and tithi and all of the implications that you see, like the, you know, the Nitya Yogas, which are named after, you know, deities and gods, and the, you know, the angles between all of these things in the Panchanga. All of this is very metaphysical, cosmic stuff, and not things necessarily of this earth. This is where we get into measuring our karma. And of course you can say, well, our karma takes place on earth. Of course. Okay, so that's how we align our life on earth. But when you connect with again, planets in a nakshatra. You're looking at the deity and the Rasi that also contains that portion of sky. This is a portion of sky that, again, as the Indians showed us, are connected portions through Rasi and nakshatra once we start erecting horoscopes. These portions that were shared between the Babylonians and the Indians all connect. And so this is what the zodiac is. So again, when you conflate equinoxes and seasons, which is what the vernal equinox is, and you connect that with the band of stars and universal heavenly portions surrounding the earth, you're conflating things. You're now projecting the seasons and our earth place into the sky, like kind of egocentric, like here we are and we're projecting it into the sky, rather than saying these are energies that descend from the sky. So you can understand it this way, that the sidereal zodiac are literally the timeless portions of sky and energies that descend upon us. Planets are there and their energy emanates from that. When we take this, we're like projecting this up into that. And again, it's dubious. Of course, and there's a reason the Indians didn't do it. Even though it was in their texts, I think they clearly saw through and clearly understood what was in the Surya Siddhanta to be probably something that was either a conflation or just confusing and not in alignment with what they had done. And so they didn't use it. But what did happen is they got confused, again, because we passed through the Dark Ages. And again, I just want to say, the Dark Ages was not... It's not that the Indian astrologers were confused by these things. They seem to have understood. They got it right. All of us moving forward, like the secular people, seem to have gotten confused about how to reckon with the sidereal portions and being disconnected from the months. So there is it's certainly true that something got confused along the way, because this is very confusing. Think of how much it takes to even explain the difference between the calendar, the seasons, the equinoxes, the solar lunar cycles, and the zodiac, and how all these things are kind of mixed together. And so what has been confused and what has come forward and was probably the impetus of the confusion is the fact that Makar Sankranti is now being celebrated in the middle of January rather than on the winter solstice. The seasons are no longer aligned with the solstices the way they're supposed to be, and with 12 equal portions, like it says in the Surya Siddhanta. It's true. Probably a big reason why it's not being celebrated and honored that way anymore is because in the Surya Siddhanta it was conflated with the zodiac. And so instead of following that mistake, they kept calculating zodiac using sidereal portions. And then things got confused. So again, I've been trying for years through several channels to see if I can do what I can to get the Indians to stop screwing up Makar Sankranti and connect the months with 12 portions and the seasons and the solstices again. But again, it's very hard because now their 12 portions are soli lunar cycles, which are sidereal, and then the ingress, again, the 12 months of the calendar, which should be 12 solar portions starting from the solstice, is now 12 solar portions calculated sidereally, and it's not in connection, it's not integrated with the seasons anymore. So yes, there's confusion, and we're not helping by piling more confusion on top of the existing confusion by not seeing through this conflation of the zodiacs like some astrologers are doing. They're adding to the confusion by not seeing this. So I hope this distinction helped you understand a little bit of the sticky issues surrounding the solstices, seasons, months, soli lunar cycles, and the zodiac, and also to understand that this whole idea that just because an ancient text was talking about the earth going around the sun, that's not, it might be, you know, called tropical, but that is not the tropical zodiac used for measuring bodies circling the Earth. That was always sidereal, and for good reason.